also want to add Mignon Clyburn, tremendous friend of competition. Many of us wouldn't be here because of her. Okay, this is the last panel. There's not much that would keep these people between now and the cocktail bar. $65 billion is one of them. So I actually learned an important lesson today. There's a tremendous number of needy projects for broadband funding across the country, but I'm convinced the most needy is the audiovisual department of large law firms. So I'm telling NTIA that's really where the money needs to go. Okay, we have a great all-star panel. This is really the industry's response to the feds and the state. And we're going to go through a lot of questions quickly. We have Josh Broder, CEO of Tilson, Chris Champion, Vice President of Government Relations for Spire, Kelly McGriff, VP and Deputy General Counsel of Uniti Group, Staci Pies, Vice President of Public Policy at Crown Castle, and Matt Wiltanger, GC, Unite Private Networks. Okay, Matt, why don't we start with you? Can you please describe Unite Private Networks and your history, if any, in terms of getting broadband funding? I know you get E-rate funding and other things. And how important have these broadband fundings been for your company? How important are they now? How important will they be in the future?
Yeah, so good afternoon, Matt Wiltanger from Unite Private Networks. Thanks for having me. Thanks for staying. Chip, you should know that naming us a copper sponsor means that we will give you more money next year to get off that. Really don't want to be affiliated with copper in any way. We are a fiber provider. We have fiber networks in 21 states. We've been around for about 24 years, 7 offices. Our headquarters are in Kansas City. Don't care to hear any more Cincinnati Bengals talk today. To your question, E-rate for us was transformative and continues to be transformative for our company. We would not be where we are today, 24 years later, without the E-rate program. We've done some CARES Act work in the last year as well, but E-rate is the vast majority of our experience with government funding.
Great. Kelly, how about you? I know you've been very active on broadband deployment. And Uniti has been a very successful company. How important are subsidies and funding for broadband for you now? How important do you and Kenny look at them for the future?
Well, thanks, Andy, and thank you, Chip and Julia and Angie for having us. And this has been an incredible day. But so Uniti Fiber, E-rate has been a huge part of Uniti Fiber as well. We're very blessed to be involved with all of our school and library partners, and it helps us in a lot of different ways. But one of the most important is it allows us to get to some communities that we may not otherwise have been able to get to. I mean, we've got these. You can always tell the salespeople because they're the most gorgeous people in the company, and they smell the best, and they dress the best, and they can sell everything. But then you take that back to the finance department, and they just say, "Well, we just can't afford to get out there." And so when you have the E-rate money, it allows us to kind of establish that beachhead that then allows our salespeople to go in behind that and say, we're providing connectivity to this, to your educational system. And so now it's very easy for us to sell to this law firm, this 2-man law firm, or to this mom and pop hardware store. They couldn't pay $10,000 a month on a 60-month contract for us to build all the way out down a 40-mile road, but they can afford $400 a month for 60 months. And so it's been a big part of our growth into rural America.
But it's an interesting perspective that these schools, libraries are also an imprimatur for you getting into a market. So, Chris, you've been very successful at Spire wireless cable. I know you just bought Troy Cable. How important, in your area, Mississippi, Alabama, some of the surrounding states have broadband funding been so far? How important do you think it's going to be for Spire going forward?
Sure. So just a quick background. Our company was started in the 80s as a wireless carrier on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. The first call being from a guy named Archie Manning to then Congressman Trent Lott. So we've come a long way since that time. But government funding has played a large part of our growth as we developed a tower network across Mississippi from the wireless perspective. USF was a big part of that. And then some guys that were smart enough, a lot smarter than I was at the time, decided, hey, we have all this fiber connecting our towers. Why don't we go out and use that and grow our business with the fiber to the premises network? And so we've been able to successfully do that over the last 6 or 7 years. We've done that with our own capital up until now. We started with the CARES Act. The state of Mississippi set aside some funding to build out to unserved areas. And so we were able to take advantage of some CARES Act funds there. As you mentioned, we've acquired a company in Alabama, Troy Cable, which we spend most of our time dogging cable. So it's interesting that we bought a company called Troy Cablevision, but most of their plan is now fiber. And so we're going to go hard after a lot of this money that's on the table and have been involved with a lot of the conversations at the state level and the federal level. And we can't get to where we want to be without federal funding in a lot of parts of rural Mississippi and Alabama.
So I have to ask, is that the same Archie Manning who's in the famous Caesars commercials?
He's also the dad of 2 former players. I don't know if you remember that either.
All right. So Josh, you and I have talked about this earlier. I think you are on more points of the compass, when it comes to broadband funding than any company. You're a complete vertically integrated, broadband entity. So can you give us a little perspective on Tilson and how important broadband is for you and will be for you?
Sure. So Tilson's on a mission to build America's information infrastructure, and we do that really in 3 key ways. One is in consultants advising both private companies and public agencies on how best to deploy infrastructure and infrastructure subsidy. Today we do that for 6 state and territory broadband offices, and we suspect more here as this cycle progresses. Second is as a design builder, we have about 600 employees nationally, drilling holes under the streets and pulling fiber, and 23 national offices and 42 states. And then finally, as an infrastructure developer or co-developer, a couple of examples of our projects would be the North Carolina DOT and the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission's fiber footprint for intelligent transportation system is something that we sort of enhance and commercialize so other carriers can lease it to reach folks on a middle mile basis. So we're providing both actual infrastructure services, mostly as a carrier of carriers, as a builder, and as a consultant. And we are sort of a creature of stimulus. We were a very small consulting company, maybe a dozen people, when the last round of broadband investment happened during the heady days of BTOP, and sort of propelled on those projects, we became about a 100 employee company. And today we recognize that our customers, many of which are in this room, businesses float on a sea of federal, state, and local support to get to the places where business cases are not obvious. And so we're really proud to participate in private investment projects in places where there's a business case, but in so much of America where there isn't, we just recognize that this kind of federal and other support is just critical to make sure that those areas aren't left behind.
Great. Well, we're all riding one way or the other on that funding sea, and high tide raises all boats. So Staci, Crown Castle, very pioneering company, broke out of the tower silo a few years ago, very active in terms of metro fiber, long haul, mid-mile fiber. How important, is broadband funding to your company, both directly and I would say even indirectly as a tower owner? And how important do you think the future funding will be to Crown Castle? Because we want to keep you as a platinum sponsor.
We will always be platinum. Thanks, Andy, and thanks Chip and Angie for putting on such a great day. Am I not on? Can't hear me? I don't know how to use this. Okay, I'm echoey. How about here? Here? So you're exactly right, Andy. I think we're a little bit different from our peers here sitting on the panel today in that Crown Castle is the largest provider of shared infrastructure in the United States. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means. We've got 40,000 macro towers across the country. We've got 115,000 from our latest investor report, small cells on air or under contract. And that's a pretty significant increase just over the last few months. And we've got 80,000 route miles of fiber, and the fiber supports our small cell deployment. And we also serve enterprise customers, including governmental entities with that fiber, including among other folks here, we are the 5th largest E-rate provider in the country. One of my top E-rate guys sent me a really lengthy spreadsheet last night. And I think if I interpret it correctly, we're serving in 500 distinct markets for E-rate customers. So in that respect, we do have a pretty significant part of our business that relies on federal funding. But we're looking at the IIJA, and I think I heard Doug call it the IJA. Did anybody else hear that? Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna stick with that because I think we need like a fun TikTok-y kind of name, the IJA. That we think there's new opportunities for Crown Castle. And one, of course, is what we do as an infrastructure provider, and that is facilitating deployment for our customers, some of whom will be direct recipients or subgrantees under the IJA. And we already do that today. We have customers who are CAF recipients and RDOF recipients, and we facilitate their deployment. And we think there's going to be a lot more opportunity in that market. We also believe that there could be significant opportunities in partnering with local governments on middle mile deployment. And of course, we don't know quite what that will look like yet until we see what NTIA comes out with. But that might be a sweet spot for Crown Castle, especially in markets where we see small cell growth opportunity. And then there is money that I think, and people don't really talk a lot about this, but I think there's going to be local governments and state governments who are upgrading their own infrastructure and being able to provide both small cell and fiber services and connections to those local governments as they upgrade their own networks. And they need to be able to do that to serve customers. Those are 3 opportunities that aren't necessarily distinct. They might be all awarded through different programs that could be beneficial for Crown Castle and for our customers.
So Staci, I think you made 2 really important points. I mean, first is partnering. I mean, what we're hearing is that, a number of the government agencies want to see multidimensional projects, fiber, towers, DAS, small cells, wireless. And secondly, what we're hearing, and we saw this with BTOP and the BIP program, is that if you're successful in getting one program, it actually enhances your success in getting the other. First of all, you can even use one program's money as part of your match. But if you have one program that's CapEx, you can make a compelling case for OpEx and vice versa. So, Kelly, along those lines, to the extent that Uniti is successful in obtaining broadband funding, and I'm sure if you're involved, they will be under the IJA or IIJA. Where and how would you envision Uniti using that funding? I mean, are you going to get that money? What are you going to do with it? And would you apply for that funding unilaterally as Uniti, or maybe as part of a coalition, with others?
That's, definitely all part of our, discussion that we're having internally. We're very interested in that. But we'd want to be very sure that it would be in an area where we could provide value. I mean, people are working for this money, and it's coming out of their paycheck, and it's being paid to the federal government, and then that money is then being sent out on this type of program. And we just want to be really sure that whatever we do, we can do it in a way that is to the best of our ability. And so I would want us to make sure that we're in a market where we're going to be building out where we can provide 100% good service, good knowledge, and quality. Because if we don't do that, then I feel like that's violating the trust, right? The sacred trust, really. I mean, you read every once in a while about an F-15 that goes off the end of a carrier and into the water. And that young man or young woman who has trained at the Naval Academy, worked all those years, and then crashes that plane, they bilge out of the Navy. And the reason is because that's $1 billion aircraft. So, I mean, I think we need to be just as serious about this type of program and this money, because it's very important. And so we want to make sure that we're very interested in participating in any way. We want to make sure that we go into a market, though, that's willing to have low barriers and wanting to partner with good quality companies. And we want to partner with good quality governmental entities that are looking to build out and actually provide something for their citizens that's worthwhile and that's scalable in the future.
So Chris, I mean, many of the other panelists are nationwide, regional. I mean, you guys are, fairly, focused in 2-3 states, and you already have a huge footprint in those states. So, how would you consider using, the money, not just the IGA money, but the Treasury money, maybe RUS money, to even further densify, Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee?
Sure, we're looking at the funding, from everything. How can you provide better connectivity to a school in Birmingham, Alabama, to how can you serve someone at the end of the line in Hot Coffee, Mississippi? That's the real name of a town, by the way. So we're looking at everything. I think you're going to have a lot of smaller communities. I do a lot with state legislators, and legislators are always coming to me and saying, hey, how come you can get service in Meridian, Mississippi, but you can't bring it to, Wetumpka, Alabama, or, some other small town? And so, the rural Mississippian and Alabamian is now saying, I want the same thing that they have in the big city. And a big city in Mississippi is pretty small. So, we're spending a lot of our time seeing how we can work, how counties will use their ARPA money to capitalize and put it together with maybe some capital projects fund money to go in areas where it's really difficult for us to make it with the private capital investment. So it's all on the table for us right now.
Great. So Josh, I had a client say to me the other day, hey, I wish, the BEAD program wasn't 44 billion, but 4 billion. I wish it wasn't nationwide. I wish it was 3 or 4 states, because it's just so big. It's like boiling the ocean. I don't know where to begin. So from your perspective, I mean, there are so many opportunities out there. I mean, how exactly is Tilson going to go after this money? And, how would you prioritize going after some of these funds?
Sure. So, I think the first place we're already encountering it is through our consulting relationships with state and large local government that are trying to plan on how to best build capacity and deploy these funds. And so we have had a history during the period between the waves of federal support in this area, where state appropriation drove, various competitive state programs. And this provides an opportunity for a lot of that state capacity that has already been built to go to work to finish some of their missions there. And so that's the first place for us. The second place to us, and probably the biggest opportunity, is just in the sheer amount of infrastructure that needs to be built. And one of the challenges that I think that all of the participants on the field face is that all of the available resources to build these networks are working today. And every tradesperson in this space got 20 hours of overtime this week. And so there's just a critical need for workforce capacity. And so we're very focused on adding 400 new tradesmen to our workforce this year, actually get the work done. I think the final area is in partnership with carriers who want to get local projects done. And so one of the things that we found, and this is a big challenge in this moment, is this tension between middle mile infrastructure and last mile infrastructure. And so we have a lot of carrier partners who are trying to get projects done. And take the the Pennsylvania Turnpike, for example, all along the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and there's money available to build out their network, but there's just really huge limitations on what they can afford from a transport cost perspective. The transport costs operating is a real challenge. And so we're looking at areas where we're in a position to commercialize infrastructure, either for our commercial or agency partners, to bring down the cost of making those last mile projects possible.
So Josh, you bring up a matter, it's been, I'm hearing about recently, that's workplace training. I heard like the average fiber splicer is 60 years old. There's the great retirement. You're going to have all these programs hitting at once. Are there the people out there that can do it? So let me ask Staci, I mean, is that an advantage to Crown Castle? You guys have an in-house, construction, repair, maintenance organization. You have, the tens of thousands of towers, that can be part of the platform for a lot of this. I mean, how is Crown thinking about leveraging those personnel and, hard assets to be a platform for a lot of this funding?
It's a good question, Andy. We do have in-house personnel. We have workforce training programs, and we also have contractors that we work with. And so we do have the knowledge and the expertise, and we continue to provide training so that we continue to grow that workforce. But I don't think that the workforce problem, that Crown Castle will magically solve the workforce problem. I think it's something we hear Commissioner Carr talk a lot about. And there's other folks who've been focused on it as well. It's a really important issue. And I'm hopeful that with the funding, and there's funding that is specifically designated for planning. I don't know if workforce training is part of that planning, but I think that state and local governments need to be really mindful of the fact that we've got to make sure that we've got the workforce to be able to deploy these networks. One of the things we've been talking a lot about since the IJA passed is implementation. And that's sort of a boring word, implementation. What does that mean? NTIA is running their, preparing for their NOFO, and there's lots of implementation that's going on. But in my mind, implementation means, do we have all of the parts that are necessary to ensure that the money is spent efficiently and effectively and is getting broadband to people who either don't have access to broadband today or don't have affordable access to broadband? And the workforce piece is just one part of it. But I would say that one of the advantages that Crown Castle has is that we do have tower, small cell, and fiber assets, and we've got the knowledge and the expertise to be able to deploy and to be able to provide services to companies who are looking for that expertise. We have that in-house.
Great. I mean, we're telling clients both before the NTIA on Friday for the states, tell them to use some of the money up front for workplace training, because you have a 4-year time frame under the BEAD program to build this out. Okay, and if the workers aren't there, it's just not going to happen. So Matt, let me turn to you. I know Unite Private Network's been very focused in terms of what you're doing, but you're also affiliated with Cox. Cox Cable, other Cox operations. I mean, how will Unite go after the money? Will you go after it individually? Will you go after it with Cox? Would you go after it in partnerships with third parties?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
We do have a relationship with Cox. We're majority owned by Cox, for those folks who don't know. And so we do work with them on a variety of matters. And so when there are opportunities to, again, serve communities with Cox, we would do that. But generally speaking, the thing that's most exciting about what we do, and we're probably not unique, is it's great to build stuff. It's just so rewarding to go into communities, to build a school network, or to bring fiber. We've always enjoyed that, because it feels like if you're doing something expansionary, you can't just kind of sit back. It really propels it, literally and figuratively propels the company. So we are going to be open to everything. We'll do public-private partnerships. We'll work with Cox. We'll work with anybody, anywhere that makes sense. So this is a great opportunity for us. And again, we're very, very excited about it.
Great. Hey, Chris, quick answer. This is an issue that, I know a lot of us have been thinking about. how important is it for the states in awarding the broadband sub-grants to prioritize recipients that actually have real world experience and background in installing and operating fiber? What we saw in the RDOF program is that, billions of dollars went to new entrants, unqualified people. A lot of that funding is slowly bouncing back to the FCC. I mean, is that a real priority? And how should we emphasize it?
Yeah, I think it is a priority. And as you mentioned, that some of that appeared in RDOF, but I think what's going to be more challenging is having these state offices adequately staffed to know who's capable and who's not capable when they try to submit applications. I can see in the states that we operate in, we have some states that are ready to go, have their offices ready. They can pick the good players and the bad players, but there are some states that are so far behind that I don't know what NTA is going to do with them when they try to give them the money. So I think that's where the importance is going to be is getting the proper staff in these state agencies to make those decisions.
Anyone else on the panel want to quickly comment on that?
Yeah, Andy, I have a quick comment on that. I think NTI can do a lot to help the states that aren't prepared. They can provide sort of templates, procurement policies. One thing that Crown Castle has been supporting is the concept that if you are already on the GSA schedule, that can serve as sort of a safe harbor for the state to demonstrate that you are qualified. I think we need to have a way to ensure that there is financial and operational capability to deploy the network without excluding companies. But certainly, we don't want to end up in a situation where subgrantees are not able to deploy the network. So the GSA schedule might be one piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, broadband build out, it's not rocket science, but it's hard. I mean, it takes a pretty deep knowledge of engineering and technological know-how and knowing how to secure underlying rights and, of course, access to a lot of capital. So, and again, it gets back to this is money that's coming from the government that's hard earned and hard come by. And so I think it's really important that we look at those companies that have been in the space a long time. And I agree with you, Chris, that in Alabama and Mississippi and other places around the South that we deal with, that they stand up really good agencies that are staffed by former industry folks and have a lot of expertise and knowledge, and also know how to reach out and tap into the industry to ask for advice and to work with the industry on developing regs and things. How we can always make sure that money is spent correctly.
So in other words, you want to separate the fiber optics from the fiber optics?
Yeah, oh, that's good.
Seriously.
I think we've seen in some of the various funding sources that there is some allowance for using some of the support for administrative costs. And I think administrative costs are only part of the story. There also has to be capacity, as a number of the panelists have noted. And so I think a key focus for federal agencies launching these programs is to build that state capacity. And that state capacity means both funds to have an adequate staff and also access to the necessary expertise. I think the states are in the best position to choose and know who's who in their states. And so I think if we can help build that capacity in those places, the states are closest to who those players are. And I see we're getting the 5-minute warning here. So before I sort of yield the mic here, I just have to say that in choosing those players, it's critical that we ensure that there's competition.
Well, I think your point's an important one in terms of dealing with the states. It's like that old Tip O'Neill line that all politics is local. I mean, these decisions are going to be made in Hartford and Tallahassee and, not on 12th and Pennsylvania Avenue. Okay. Quick question. Let's go right down the line. Staci, starting from you, should the NTIA and the states prioritize fiber projects over wireless, satellite, and non-fiber providers? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
So if we now only have 4 minutes left, and Andy, before we started, you said I could answer whatever question I want to answer,
ahead.
regardless of what you ask. I'm not going to answer that question, not because I don't like it, because I do think that it's a really important question, but I wanted to emphasize something that Congresswoman Fletcher spoke about in her remarks this morning, and I think it goes to what Josh was just speaking to, and that is not only do the states need to have the resources, but the local governments need to have the resources. And this was like question 12 or something out of the 14 you gave us, and I think we're on 4. But I want to make sure that we emphasize, and I think INCOMPAS did a great job with this in their comments, that NTI needs to be reaching out to the state and local governments today to ensure that the local governments have the capacity to be able to process the permit applications that they're going to be receiving in a flood. And I'm pretty sure a lot of cities don't have that, and they're critical to the implementation goals of the funding. Sorry about
Absolutely.
not
Look,
answering
the
your
local
question.
governments have to be partners here. They can't have their hand out. They can't act like they have historically, or this just isn't going to happen. Josh?
Glad Staci said that because she's right on the money. I think the short answer to the question, should federal agencies prioritize fiber, is that they have to in most cases under the existing statutory framework. And so I think there is room for wireless, for fast wireless, for modern wireless. But as most wireless people know, it requires a lot of fiber closer to where those customers are going to be to support a very high quality wireless service. So if you're an all of the above person, you still need more fiber.
Great. So Chris, as you know, the Treasury program has, as they say, their thumb on the scale for fiber. The wireless industry fought back and made the IJA, technology neutral. Is that the right answer?
Well, I think that's the right answer, but I'm going to steal a phrase from the great theologian Haley Barbour, who always said, the main thing is keeping the main thing the main thing. And the main thing here is to make sure that we spend this money to get as many people connected as we possibly can, no matter what that technology is.
Great. Okay. Kelly, you always have your eye on the main thing. What do you think?
I think.
That's MAIN, not for Josh, MAINE, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, no, I agree with all those points. I mean, as a lawyer, it's hard to think in a binary world. So there's obviously, there's a place for everything. But the reality is, done this since 2002. And I mean, the fiber goes from point A to point Z, but it's scalable because you can upgrade the electronics on each end. You can increase the speeds and everything else. And we know that. And we in the industry and in the government, we're comfortable with that. And, there's a reason that, we're doing that and that we're, kind of building out like that. And as Josh said, we can have wireless, but at the end, you're still going to have a lot of fiber to, connect at the end. So I think it's just really important that we look at everything, but keep the main thing the main thing. Good point.
Well, that's the main thing is wireless needs wireline and wireline needs wireless. And Matt, that leaves you with the honor of having the final word here. How, in your view, should governments prioritize technology platforms?
Well, after 10 hours, I'm tempted to filibuster. Just start talking about stuff. Chris,
there's bourbon outside.
Yeah, well, I think Chris said it the right way. Fiber should be the priority, but there are places, you heard earlier today, there are places in West Virginia that are really, really hard to build. And there are places in Texas that are really, really hard to build. And the goal needs to be getting service to the underserved communities. That's the goal, and to do it in an expedient fashion. So yes, fiber's king, but they have to be a little bit flexible to make sure that they meet the goals of these rules.
And I think they will. A big round of applause for a great panel.